You are listening to Packers Talk Radio Network.
PackersTalk.com.
With the 21st pick in the 2014 NFL Draft, the Green Bay Packers select Clinton Dix.
It's time for the Packers War Room Podcast.
Made me a believer into really thinking that the Packers really could run the table, and that was when I said right away, they're winning the NFC North.
The bomb to Jordy Nelson was just a moment that I'll never forget. For him to be able to get behind the corner and really just catch the prayer, essentially, was just quintessential Packers 2016.
Like I said, for this team to win 2 playoff games was just astounding with how beat up they were and the state of their defense, really.
And now, alongside Jacob Westendorf and Cody Bauer, here's your host of the Packers War Room Podcast, Ross Uglem.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Packers War Room offseason podcast. I am your host, Ross Uglem. I'm a writer at Cheesehead TV, and back in black this week is Jacob Westendorf. Jacob, how's it going?
Good to be back after my 1-week hiatus. Bummed I missed the cornerback show, so quick recap. I love Sidney Jones, so there is my cornerbacks recap for last week. Excited to be back this week to talk safeties and most notably Jabril Peppers.
Certainly we want to thank Zach Jacobson one more time for stepping in for Jacob when he was unable to fulfill his duties. And joining us, though, for every single show so far is CheeseheadTV.com's draft expert, Cody Bauer. Cody, how's it hanging?
It's hanging pretty good, man. Excited to talk some safeties. Ross, I know a position you think the Packers might address kind of more so than a lot of other people. It's going to be a fun show, and we have a couple things to talk about before we even get into safeties. Some decent stuff, so get ready to get to it.
Yeah, certainly. Just kind of a theory that I've had and been looking at some prospects and just Thompson's never a guy that we're going to have completely pegged going into the draft, really, with the exception of the Clinton Dix draft. I mean, that was the only one that really kind of made sense from a draftnik perspective, or 100% sense. So something certainly always to pay a little bit of attention to, but. We are back, and we have one little bit of news. Last time we got together, or not we, I guess, but the last time this show was published, the Packers were hosting Byron Bell, Ricky Jean-Francois, and Christian Michael. Christian Michael and Jean-Francois are now part of the squad. Byron Bell signed in Dallas, will likely become part of the brigade that they're going to use to try and replace Doug Free, who I believe is going to retire or has retired or whatever, but Bell not a part of the program. Jean-Francois is. He is, as we sort of discussed on the last show, versatile defensive lineman. He helped Washington at the 1, the 3, and the 5 technique. Never going to rush off the edge, but certainly going to be a run defending presence anywhere on the defensive line, and at least can, create some pressure, some hurries. You can run them on games and open up some inside rushes for your edge guys. But, like we said, not a guy that's really going to wow you from a pass rush standpoint. Jacob, you were not around to give your Jean-Francois thoughts last week. Give us what you think of the pickup there. And of course, just keep in mind, as always, that Jean-Francois was a street free agent, so yet another pickup, 3 out of the 4 for the Packers that will not count against the total compensatory pick evaluation.
I like it. 1 year, $2 million. He's a big body, like you said, a good run defender. The Packers, you can see, are kind of building. The NFC is kind of an oddball conference because when you look at building a defense to compete against opposing teams, you almost have, last year, the 2 best teams in the NFC play almost polar opposite football, where the Cowboys, you have to play against that power running game, which is where Jean-Francois comes into play, and then you've got to play against that spread passing attack like the Atlanta Falcons have. Jean-Francois comes in to kind of build that defensive line rotation. And really right now, you've got Mike Daniels, you've got Kenny Clark, who I think all of us are pretty excited about going into next year. You got Rockford, Illinois' finest, Dean Lowry on the defensive line, who, Cody, I know you really liked him last year. I obviously am rooting for him. He's from my hometown, so obviously I'd like to see him do well. And after that, there's not a lot of reliability. Letroy Guion is on the roster, I guess. I have mentioned several times I would like to see him released simply because the guy's had 2 suspensions in 3 seasons. I would like to think that the Ricky Jean-Francois signing points toward that. Ted Thompson said in meetings this week with the press that that quote will work itself out, and that I know that with the way that his contract was restructured, basically they can cut him after his 4-game suspension ends. There's really not a whole lot of reason, I guess, from a monetary standpoint to do anything before that. But bringing a guy in, you can never have enough bodies on the defensive line, and we talked about this defensive line class. It's pretty awful as far as draft class standpoint goes, so you're not really going to be able to draft anybody and get him to really contribute much to this season's roster. So bringing a guy like that in, get him as a contributor. If it's a 1-year contract and he does anything to contribute against a team like the Cowboys or some of those other teams, maybe Seattle with their power running game, great. In a playoff game like that, those are the teams he's going to shine against. If you ask him to be a pass rusher against a team like the Falcons, you're probably going to be disappointed. But Ross, I think you said it pretty well when you signed him. This isn't a signing that's going to win a Super Bowl, but it's a solid signing similar to, say, Howard Green during that 2010 Super Bowl run there, where it's just a solid move that kind of goes under the radar that, yeah, it'll help you win a game here or there that, he does some of those things that show up that really nobody notices. So I like the move. It's $2 million, kind of a drop in the bucket. The Packers still have a boatload of cap space, and it really allows them some flexibility along the defensive line. So I like the move. I like the player. Somebody they've had interest in the past, and they finally were able to get him in and get him in the program.
And that's something else you mentioned, too. I mean, this is absolutely somebody that they have on a number of occasions been linked to, and is, as Thompsonites or Packers fans even, we're just not used to anybody getting leaked. I mean, that place is as tight-lipped as any. We mentioned the Martellus Bennett thing. I mean, nobody even knew that was going on until it was a complete done deal. So you know that the Jean-Francois Packers fit interest is something that has been around for a while because we've known about it, and it's just potentially unfortunate that it happened this late in his career. As far as Guion's concerned, I mean, I think I've talked about this defensive line class and not loving it, but what I think you could potentially see is the Packers feeling pretty good about their run defenders on the defensive line because Daniels can do it, is pretty darn good at it, and then, of course, you have Lowry and Clark and Jean-Francois that specialize in it. There's a potential, I think, maybe for Thompson to look for an interior rusher, somebody maybe who's not going to contribute a lot during against the run. And if they can find a developmental interior rusher in this draft class, then I think you might see the green light to release Guion because he does offer just a little bit of pop as a pass rusher. Certainly his first season in Green Bay flashed that more than any other season. But right now, as far as the guys on the roster, they still could be looking for an interior pass rush component because they can't play Julius Peppers at defensive tackle anymore. He's not on the team. Brian Price, the one young defensive line kind of prospect that people, I guess, are even remotely excited about, is also not a guy that you are expecting to rush the passer very much. Cody, what are your thoughts on the Francois signing and him actually becoming part of the program?
Did I hear correctly that Jacob compared him to Howard Green and then went on to say, well, he's not a guy who's going to win a Super Bowl. If we remember back, Howard Green is kind of a guy that helped us win a Super Bowl. That's quite the comparison. But I dig the signing, obviously. We talked about it last week. I won't get into too much. It helps the D-line rotation, helps against the run. He can two-gap really well. He's played in several 3-4 defenses. A good guy to have in the DL room, watching film and preparing and getting ready week to week. He's a professional. He doesn't miss games, so it's a good signing.
All right, so let's talk about the offensive line a little bit before we dive into this week's position group, which is safeties. Just talk because the league meetings have taken place, I think, this year in sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, a place that I'm heading soon for the Final Four. Go Heels. And the NFL general managers were around, the NFL head coaches were around, and people got interviewed. One of those people being Packers head coach Mike McCarthy. McCarthy talked about the hole that T.J. Lang has left at right guard. Says that Jason Spriggs is a tackle. Says that Brian Bulaga is a tackle. Guys, just going to check. I'll give my thoughts right away, but is that surprising? Just general thoughts on the guard position. My guy from the start, as soon as I saw Lang's contract announced with Detroit, was just let Kyle Murphy do it. And I've been on that train from the beginning. I think that his frame, though he's tall and athletic, is not that much different from when Sitton and Lang first came into the league. I realized that eventually Sitton and Lang both became quite girthy and quite guard-like, but you have to remember that these guys were both blindside tackles in college. Lang, I believe, was the left tackle at Eastern Michigan, and Josh Sitton was the right tackle for a left-handed quarterback at Central Florida, if I'm not mistaken. So, moving tackles from good offenses inside the guard is not something that, the Packers are not accustomed to. Murphy was a player that played a little right guard last year. I think if you install Murphy at right guard from day one, you're going to be fine. I really thought he was a mid-round guy. I would have taken him in the 4th or 5th round with absolutely no hesitation. When they took him where I did, I immediately said this is my favorite pick of the draft. I really thought when they took him that he was T.J. Lang, the potential Lang-Sitton replacement back when, because you guys got to remember when that draft took place, we were all under the assumption that the Packers were going to go into the 2016 season with Lang and Sitton as their guards, and that they were eventually going to have to pick probably 2 out of Treader, Lang, and Sitton. God forbid they pick none, which is obviously what ended up happening. But this, I think, Murphy for me was always the interior option if someone left, and then Spriggs was the perimeter option if someone ever left. Cody, your thoughts on the guard position in light of Coach McCarthy's comments?
I'm kind of with you. I think Kyle Murphy, going into this offseason, going on to before the draft right now, is probably leaving the clubhouse. I think most coaches would probably love to see that. I think a lot of fans would like to see that, but it's an open competition as far as between him and Luke Patrick. Maybe they end up bringing a veteran. Some guy gets cut going into it if they're not happy with some of their young guys' development. But you could look to see them taking one in the draft. But fans should probably temper excitements and realizing that he's probably not going to draft that position. As unglamorous it is, everyone thinks it's a hole, but we've seen it time and time again. He finds value in the middle rounds and can make those guys be good early, especially when you have good tackles with Bulaga on the right side there. He could help, and Lindsley's slowly becoming a seasoned vet, so. It's a plug-and-play position, according to Thompson, and fans need to realize that. And a middle-round guy might come in and compete right away for a starting job. Much like some of our young guys were thrusted in early and develop into a good player. So I think most hope it's going to be Murphy, but that's who I'd like to see. Right now it's up in the air, and I don't think we should all be biting our nails with fear that it's going to be a big problem. We'll make it work.
Yeah, I think the Packers also brought in another body that McCray. He had a brother that was with the Packers at a different position earlier, but just today signed a young man that I believe had spent time with the Tennessee Titans, and and is going to be part of the guard competition, but maybe not somebody that they really feel like is going to be the leader in the clubhouse. So Jordan McRae was the guard's name. He spent time with the Titans. Was, I believe, played his college ball at UCF, same as Josh Sitton, but he's going to be another body in there with Lucas Patrick and Kyle Murphy, kind of in that competition at least. Jacob, basically, as long as the plan isn't Don Barkley, or what are your thoughts at guard?
As long as the plan isn't Don Barkley is like my saving grace here. The only thing that I guess could be considered a little surprising is if you guys remember way back when the Packers drafted Derek Sherrod, and let me pour one out for him because I really thought that guy had a chance to be a pretty good left tackle before I was in the house when his leg injury, and I watched it happen. My goodness. It was just horrific. It happened right in front of me up there in Kansas City. But if you guys remember that training camp, the only thing I guess that is a little surprising from McCarthy's comments is the training camp when they brought in Derek Sherrod was they experimented with him playing left guard, and the idea was they wanted to, quote, get their 5 most talented offensive linemen on the field. Well, their 5 most talented offensive linemen include Jason Spriggs, and that, to me, at least says, and maybe it's a positive thing, that they don't want to play musical chairs with their offensive linemen, which is something I've barked about for years, is it was nice that, yes, you want your 5 best players on the field, but at the same time, that means one injury caused 3 guys to change positions. And that's something that this would cause as well, where, say Brian Bulaga gets hurt, now you got one guy moving here, and one guy moving there, and one guy moving here, and I say all that to say, good by the Packers, because we saw, for example, I know there's going to be some complaints that, yes, the Packers moved up in the draft to essentially draft what has become a swing tackle in Jason Spriggs, but you see what happened 2 years ago when Bulaga and Bakhtiari both at the same time got hurt. Now, if one of them gets hurt, you saw what happened. The entire offense fell apart. Having a quality insurance policy at the tackle position in a pass-first, pass-heavy offense is never going to be a bad thing. And if Jason Spriggs is just a high-quality swing tackle for his first contract, I have no problem with that. As far as the guard position goes, I think you guys have pretty much said it. I mean, if it's Kyle Murphy, that's great. If it's a mid-round pick like, say, Deion Dawkins, Nico Siragusa, somebody like that, Dorian Johnson, that's a guy you mentioned by name a couple days ago, Ross, that's fine. The only real complaint I would have, I know a lot of Packers fans have made the Anchorman joke. I know I mentioned him a few weeks ago on this show. Forrest Lamp, he's a good player. That's nothing against him. I have some real reservations about picking an offensive guard at 29th overall, especially with the defense being in the shape that it's in and with the guard position being just what it is to the offense. So Kyle Murphy, Lucas Patrick, as long as it's not Don Barkley, that's how I feel. So a mid-round draft pick, 4th-round pick, I'm cool with that. I'm not real keen on taking a guard in the 1st round. I hope, I'm kind of with you guys, if Kyle Murphy can bulk up and win that spot, that's a guy I really liked him in last year's draft. I'd like to see him win that spot. But if they pick somebody in the 4th round, I'm cool with that too.
All right, let's talk running backs. The other, I guess, really...
Jacob.
Go ahead.
You think you could maybe get your mom, Jacob, to crochet that into a pillow and sell it anybody but Don Barkley? I think that could fly off the shelves.
Yeah, I'll see what she can do. Let's see. I'll ask her tomorrow morning. How about that?
Works.
Anybody but Don Barkley, I'm on.
Let's talk about really, I think at this point, what can only be perceived as really only the one other hole on the offense. I mean, really, I think after the 2 tight end additions, you've put yourself in a position where you've got one of the best, probably 6 or 7 TE1s in the league. You're in a situation where you've likely got one of the best 10 or 12 second tight ends in the league, and I really would be surprised if you could find me a third tight end with the resume and the ability of Richard Rodgers. You might not think of him you might not think much of him as a starter, but as a third tight end, that's a pretty incredible luxury to have. People, I guess, have their reservations about the Packers' receiving core, but Nelson, another year removed from that ACL surgery, the development of Trevor Davis, the development of Germano Allison. I think, obviously there's no hole at QB. So let's talk running backs. Eddie Lacy gone. It doesn't appear at this time that John Crockett is going to return. So right now you're looking at 3 returnees and no additions, and that would be Don Jackson, Ty Montgomery, of course, and then Christian Michael was brought back. And those are your 3 backs right now that are a part of the program. Ted Thompson said they need more guys, and that could come in a lot of different ways. Of course, they haven't ruled out that the story. We talk about, these writers, and I always talk about football guys and storytellers. And the storytellers really have a hard time letting the idea of Adrian Peterson to Green Bay go. Never mind that it's a pretty awful scheme fit. Never mind that it would be a public relations issue for both Peterson, a guy that I think long-term would like to be remembered by the Vikings, and then a public relations issue for the Packers just because of the child abuse situation. So I think, it's an awful fit. Guy can't block, guy can't catch, guy can't run out of the shotgun. But it just won't die. It refuses to die. And then one other, speaking of red flags character-wise, Joe Mixon is somebody that Mel Kiper kind of introduced this as somebody that might be a possibility for Green Bay. Cody, how do you feel about the Peterson thing? How do you feel about the Mixon thing?
I think we hit on Peterson enough previously. That's just a big no. I think you nailed it. The storyteller, / beat guy, differences and just not wanting to let this go, but it just does not make any sense. There was a rumor, of course, that after the draft potentially. I don't see enough value for bringing in Peterson, and that's even without the PR hit. I mean, just on the football field alone, I'm not sure what he brings to this team that's going to help them. He just doesn't run well out of the shotgun. I think you've seen enough out of Ty Montgomery that makes you want to see more of him. He's young and has a potential where Peterson is definitely on the downside. Peterson's asking price is ridiculous, so it doesn't make any sense on a lot of levels, just on the football level. Never mind the off-field stuff. We'll get to Mixon and off-field stuff. And awful. I think every one of us, we don't need to all condemn it anymore. We all know it's awful, right? But you need to talk to the young man, and none of us are in the inner circles of seeing how he is at personal visits to teams or how he interviewed with teams at the Combine. But, you need to just talk to him, and if that's something you want to take on as an organization, then, everybody deserves a second chance. The punishment that was served to him, or it was given to him, was served. Was it enough? Probably not, but this is what the world we live in. If a team, a GM, an owner, everybody's on board and is willing to work with the young man and making sure that he stays on the straight. And that was just a one-time incident. And again, a lot of information we don't know about as far as how he is as a man today. Is he remorseful and all these kinds of things? And it's impossible for us to say, are the Packers a team willing to take a PR hit, risk like that? That hasn't really been the case. And previously they have taken some character guys, but usually as undrafted free agents and kind of, took a gamble on them where you'd have to draft Mixon in the first or second round. It's, a bigger gamble than they've taken previously, but again, you'd hope that the Packers, with their track record, had done their due diligence and made sure that it was an isolated incident, and he's really, changed course since then, but it's just a lot of information that us as, the outside don't exactly have full information to, but I don't see Green Bay making a move like that for Mixon.
No, and I think, and this sounds awful because I'm just going to talk about it in a football-only sense, but as far as I'm concerned, just from a value standpoint, I think if you're going to do that kind of stuff, first of all, everybody is familiar with my one asshole rule. You do it once. You can have one bad apple in the clubhouse as far as I'm concerned, and then after that, it's time to avoid it. And the other aspect of it is, I think you need to get your discount. And like I said, that sounds terrible because we're talking about, I guess it's not a domestic violence issue because apparently they weren't a couple are really associated with each other at all, but it is a violence against women issue, and that's 150% not okay. But when you are talking about somebody with an incident like this in the past, I don't think they should be disallowed to play football forever and ever and locked away. I mean, he served his penalty. Was it enough, like you said, Cody? Maybe not. But the point is, when you are dealing with something like this from just a strictly value perspective, you should get a discount. I mean, if you think that he's worth taking at 25, then you should be able to take him at 40. And if you can't get, if he goes before 40, tough luck. Somebody else's PR problem. So that's, I guess, my main issue with the Mixon idea at 29 is I don't really think they're getting much of a discount. I love Mixon. I've seen. I've shared a few vines. I took a still screen cap of him in an awful situation, just surrounded by defenders, like 60 yards away from the end zone, and he ends up scoring. He's a very patient runner. One of the most obvious comps I've ever seen. Runs almost exactly like Le'Veon Bell. But I don't think he's better than Fournette. I don't think that he's better than Cook, even if he hadn't punched somebody. So I just don't think I'm going to take the third best running back at 29. Jacob, your thoughts on this whole running back discussion?
Well, to start real quick, you guys were talking about Adrian Peterson, and I didn't get to give my thoughts on him last week. That's kind of why I asked to have that in this week's portion of the show. I wouldn't do it. You guys were talking last week. Would you want him on the roster for the vet minimum? My answer to that is no. I don't. Ross, you said it perfect. There's storytellers and there's football guys, and it's the storytellers that are really talking about this. You've got people on even NFL Network are talking about how this guy still got it, and it really sounds like those are guys that are former players that sound like they're sticking up for their veteran brethren. And this is a guy who, to me, is a 32-year-old, washed up, broken down running back. And I don't care if it's the vet minimum. This is a guy who it's a bad scheme fit. I don't even care if you would adapt your scheme to your player here. The Packers are an offense that has the best quarterback in football, and they don't need to convert to adapting their scheme to this player because this is a team that still needs to throw the ball 65% of the time because that's what you do when you have the best quarterback in the NFL. And when you bring in a guy like Adrian Peterson, you're bringing him in with the understanding that you're going to commit to him to some degree of handing him the football. And the Packers don't need to hand him the football that much. So forget the fact that not only can he not catch the football and he can't block and he can't do all these other things, I don't want them to even commit the idea of changing their offense to handing him the football 15 to 20 times a game, which is something you would probably have to do for him to agree to sign here without causing a bunch of issues. As for some of the other stuff, Joe Mixon specifically that we're talking about here, I've talked about it before. As far as running backs in the first round, I'm not a proponent of it for the reasons I just discussed. Joe Mixon specifically, you guys have brought it up. What he did was awful. I'm not condoning it by any stretch of the imagination. At the same time, it is one isolated incident. It was in the past, and like I said, he served a penalty, and it was not enough. I'm not going to argue that it was, because that would be wrong of me to do so. At the same time, nobody seems to be, from a character risk standpoint by itself, Joe Mixon is probably less of a risk than Dalvin Cook. So if a Packers fan is okay with taking Dalvin Cook at 29, he should probably be okay with taking Joe Mixon at 29. And if you don't know the deal with Dalvin Cook, you should probably, it just takes a simple little search because there's a bunch of stuff that's pretty common knowledge as far as Dalvin Cook's track record. There's scouts talking about how he needs to get out of Florida, he's with the wrong crowd, yada, 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 those kinds of things. Strictly from a football standpoint, the reasons I wouldn't take Joe Mixon at 29 are because I wouldn't take a running back at 29 overall because it's a first-round pick. When you throw in Ross, you're talking about a discount and those kinds of things. Again, it sounds awful because we're talking about real life and football and all that stuff together. But you're right. If you can get him at 29 and you do those sorts of things, I should be able to get him at 49. But I wouldn't take Joe Mixon there. He's a really good football player. It's unfortunate, but I don't see that. I don't see the Packers doing that sort of thing because Cody, you mentioned it earlier as well. The last character guy I can think of them taking, and correct me if I'm wrong, is Colt Laerla, which is the guy that Ross, you volunteered to be his personal assistant like the Cowboys have with Dez Bryant and follow him around Green Bay. And that was as an undrafted free agent. And they cut him as soon as he had an issue. And that was as an undrafted free agent. So I don't remember them actually drafting anybody that had something of that sort to follow them. So I don't see them drafting a guy to take that sort of PR hit. So all in all, when it comes to the running back position, what I come back to with it all is, yes, Ezekiel Elliott, it's just like one of the first shows we did here. Yes, Ezekiel Elliott led the league in rushing, and yes, the Cowboys went 13-3 last year. The second leading rusher in the league was Jordan Howard, and he was a fifth-round pick. I think the Packers can find a complement to Ty Montgomery in the fourth or fifth round, and they would be just fine at that position. So that is what I think as far as the running back position goes. Please stop mocking Christian McCaffrey to the Packers at 29th overall.
Yeah, it's not going to help the host of the show. It really is is difficult for me. Now, something terrible happens. McCaffrey falls to the Packers in the second after securing a pass rusher or a corner, and I'm doing backflips because I understand the scheme fit. I get it. I get that. You could use him in a multitude of ways, but I just he's too carbon copy of Randall Cobb and Ty Montgomery. To same with Curtis Samuel. Somebody was blowing me up the other day about Curtis Samuel. It's like they already have two Curtis Samuels, and I really like Curtis as a player, but it's like you need like I always talk about, you build that basketball team. You don't need any more point guards. Let's get some wings. Let's get a power forward. Let's diversify the receiving group and move on from there, I guess. The only thing I guess I would say about Peterson at the minimum is this, and I think it would be certainly interesting if they were able to select if they were able to get John Ross. I would love to see Peterson in on a vet minimum deal because what I think you could do is I think you could reopen the shot play. I think if you can figure it out where Peterson can at least run out of the pistol and they can do some of their pistol stuff from 2014 or even just the eye stuff because they are one of the few teams in the league that does still employ a fullback, and occasionally Ripkowski's job is to lead block. And I think if they got into a situation where Peterson was okay carrying it 10-12 times a game, you could run 10-12 of those plays, and then you could run 3 or 4 shots or 3 or 4 play actions from under center, not just the play actions from the shotgun, and then you could do a lot of the Montgomery type stuff out of the shotgun. You can operate Michael out of the shotgun, and you can do your empty sets because I really think with Kendricks and Bennett, you're going to be able to utilize more empty sets. They're not going to have a back on the field at all times. So that's the one way I think you could make it work. Let's move on to this week's position group, which would be the safeties. Guys, what round, if any, are you looking for a safety? Cody, let's start with you.
I guess if you were to address the position at all, I'm going to say day 3. I like the group as it sits right now. We can just touch on it quick. Clinton Dix is, of course, up for a big contract extension. His career is definitely ascending. I think Morgan Burnett, solid player, nothing too flashy, nothing out of the ordinary, but he's reliable, and he seems to be one of the leaders back there. And then I like the third guy, Kendrick Rice, quite a bit. I think we've seen enough flashes from him to get me excited. And, whether it's laying the wood or, his speed is evident on the field. He just needs to kind of hone it in a little bit. But that's a decent 1-2-3 combo. And you lost the presence of Micah Hyde, so I could see the position being addressed. If value would smack you somewhere, around fourth round, I think you could start to look at that position. But, as far as I'm concerned, I didn't even, break down the safety group as far as my research on Ted Thompson's draft tendencies. I just kind of skimmed by it, not thinking that it would be a position that they addressed. So it's not real high on the list for me. But I think you could, anywhere on day 3, if you see a good value spot for somebody, I think pull the trigger.
Jacob?
Value varies here. I think that, Cody, you mentioned the Packers have 2 really good safeties, I think, and one intriguing prospect with Kentrell Brice. Kentrell Brice almost made Cole Beasley's newly born child an orphan in the playoff game against Cowboys, and we've talked about that hit several times, and he has others as well. But the other thing that has been discussed, I just had a story for FanRag that came out recently. Ross, you've talked about it several times. Mike McCarthy's talked about it several times, is Morgan Burnett might be the Packers' inside linebacker next season. I think you're going to see some sets next year where the Packers' inside linebacker tandem is Morgan Burnett and Clay Matthews, or Morgan Burnett and Jake Ryan, Morgan Burnett and Joe Thomas. But Morgan Burnett, I think, is going to be a fixture in the middle of that defense at some capacity. And they talked about doing that last year, but one of the reasons they couldn't do it is because every single quarterback on the roster was hurt. So Micah Hyde had to play slot corner and even sometimes outside corner. So kind of the replacement, which was Micah Hyde for Morgan Burnett's position, had to play over the place. So Morgan Burnett couldn't play his inside linebacker spot that they had planned for him. So with Morgan Burnett playing a hybrid role, yeah, I could see them taking one if, I don't know, that Jabril Peppers guy or I'm going to butcher that guy's last name, so I'm not even going to try, is sitting there at 29. I could see them picking a guy like that late in the first round. I could see them picking a guy on day 2. I could see them picking a guy on day 3. It really depends on what they want to do. Something else I think that has been discussed, Leroy Butler has talked about it, is picking a bunch of corners and letting Quentin Rollins or Demarius Randall play safety as well. So I think there's a lot of options at the safety position. But as far as the draft specifically, I think that they could pick one anywhere from round 1 to round 7. So I think that you could see anything.
Yeah, I think Rollins has some upside at safety. I would probably make that move this offseason. The reason I have this as a potential round 1 is, I like basically 6 safeties as guys that I'd be comfortable with in the top 50, and B, I really think Burnett should be a linebacker. I think it helps alleviate some of the coverage issues that they have in the middle. But Green Bay's scheme is not the cover 3 that Seattle runs. You'll see a lot of 1. You'll see a lot of 3. You'll see a lot of even stuff from the Packers because of what they like to do, dropping a safety down in the box to help with the run. But they also run some even stuff as far as cover 2 and cover 4 is concerned. You need interchangeable safeties for that. They're not going to have what you could have, which is Clinton Dix playing center field 100% of the time and Kentrell Brice playing Cam Chancellor 100% of the time. Both of those things would work. Brice isn't quite Chancellor, and Clinton Dix, as much as I love him, isn't quite Thomas. Nobody is. Earl Thomas is one of the best free safeties I've ever seen play, especially in that true center field role, not playing halves. He literally controls the middle of the field. But you could do that, but the Packers don't. So what do you need to do if you're going to have interchangeable safeties with Clinton Dix and Burnett at linebacker? You need another safety that can do it all. And so that's why I think you certainly could see the Packers shore up their pass defense by addressing the middle of the field, and then maybe later on in the draft addressing the outside, assuming that Randall's bounce-back year is going to address the outside, assuming that Devon House's re-signing is going to address the outside. We don't know the inner workings of what the Packers think, and honestly, the confidence level of Coach Witt. So, that, of course, brings us on to our next point. Who are the popular guys? Cody, let's start with you. Jacob and I can cover the top of the line guys. You're doing a deep dive, so talk about the deep dive guys.
Well, a couple of deep dive guys. He seems to be more of a draft Twitter favorite as opposed to big media. In fact, I think CBS has him as a ranked 7th rounder. I'm talking about Tedrick Thompson from Colorado, 6 foot, 204 pound kid. He's always around the ball, making plays. He can tackle really well. He does well in coverage. I'm not sure why he doesn't get talked about as a top 100 pick more. I know he didn't test great, but he's a guy I think if you look at the 3rd round, he's going to be a good football player for you, whether it's just special teams early, but I think he has a knack for playing, the ball extremely well, both against the run and the pass. Another kid, I guess, would be Lorenzo Jerome from St. Francis, and he was way off. I'd never heard of him, to be honest, but at the Senior Bowl, so you see him making plays, East-West Shrine Games making plays, and you look a little bit in his tape surfacing, this guy is a playmaker, and Packers do like to look at guys who get their hands on the ball a lot. He doesn't exactly fit the threshold as far as size concerns go for what Thompson likes, but he tested pretty poorly at the combine, and that hurts. I think if you see him late in day 3 or even as an undrafted free agent guy, it's a guy you want to bring in and see. Maybe he's just not a tester. Maybe he's just a baller, and put him out there in camp and see how he competes with the rest of the guys. But those are two of the later round guys I'm looking at. As far as, I guess, if value were to present itself early on day 3, a guy I really like is Marcus May. His pro day was just the other day, and he tested incredibly well. He wasn't able to at the combine. You look at his tape and kind of the lineage of what Florida got going on right now. There's DBs are just popping out of there, and he was a part of a really good system that I think honed itself well to transition to the NFL. I think he could be a really good safety, better athlete than I think Florida probably thought, and had him play more in the box. But I think he has the versatility to play some deep as well as in close to the line of scrimmage. But I think if he's there day 4 for whatever reason, if he starts falling, that's just a value pick for me. So I could live with that as well, depending on how the first 3 go.
All right, and I kind of talked about my guys, 6 guys that I really feel comfortable with. Jamal Adams, that's not happening. I mean, I really think he's going to go somewhere in the top 5. I think he's that level of safety. They're going to treat him like an Eric Berry, where he just absolutely has to get on a team right away as far as the draft is concerned. That type of impact player. And then we'll get into guys that would be, kind of a pipe dream, but at the same time, potentially something that could work out if something real bad happened to their draft stock. Malik Hooker, that's a guy I think, as close to Earl Thomas as we've seen in some time, just from a standpoint of a center fielder, cover 1, cover 3 type of safety, pure coverage guy. My issue with Hooker is that he is darn near allergic to contact, not a good tackler. So when I'm talking about the need to have an interchangeable group of safeties where they're very rarely playing cover 2, but they still need to be able to do both jobs in the sense of one can drop down in the box and one can cover free, because they will blitz Dix, they will use Dix against the run, so they would have to have somebody back deep. But I just don't think you can even dream about using Hooker in a blitzing situation or really against the run. I just don't see that, but I think he's the best cover safety that I've seen in a really, really long time, and I think you could scheme around that. You could probably move Clinton Dix to the strong safety position, not have an issue with that at all. Morgan Burnett plays linebacker, Hooker plays safety. All of a sudden, you have one of the best middle-of-the-field pass defenses in the league for years and years talking about them having basically a soft underbelly. I know that was the verbiage that Bill Johnson always used to use back when Wilde and Tausch was just green and gold today. That soft underbelly would all of a sudden be very, very good, and the Packers would really just have to worry about the boundary. They could play some different coverages out there. Then your guy, Jacob, Jabril Peppers, that's a player that you can move all over the place. I think you could play him at strong safety. I'd be a little concerned with him at free, but people forget he came into Michigan as the number one corner in high school football. A guy that has coverage skills, I think certainly as an interchangeable safety, as long as you didn't expect him to play that center field position, that Earl Thomas position, 80+% of the snaps, you could get away with that. He could drop down and play a little slot corner if you need it. I think he's proven that he's an exceptional blitzer, and at the same time, you are certainly getting an elite kick returner, punt returner type of guy, someone you could even use on offense a little bit if you're only giving him 30 or 40 defensive snaps a game. I think Peppers is right there. That Obi Melifanu from Connecticut, just an absolute workout freak show. Marcus Williams, whose numbers in coverage, especially if you pay attention to what goes on over there at Pro Football Focus, are unbelievable. Basically, no one completes a pass in his area, and he is physically very impressive. And then the other end of the spectrum, I would say a rich man's version of Kentrell Bryce, kind of a Keanu O'Neal type of clone, and that's Justin Evans from Texas A&M. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a young man who likes to bring the wood. He is a very, very violent football player, but is out of position less than you would see most guys that hit as hard as he does. So, Jacob, who are the popular guys in the round that you're looking for a safety?
You guys kind of mentioned most of them. I mean, Obi Melifanu, Jabril Peppers, Tedrick Thompson was one guy I was going to talk about because it's kind of funny that Ted Thompson could pick a guy named Tedrick Thompson. I think that's funny. Malik Hooker's a guy who is interesting to me because I've seen him kind of fluctuate anywhere from, like, in the top 3. I think Jeff Risdon has him going as high as 2 overall. But I've seen him drop all the way to 20 in some mock drafts, so you don't really know where he could go. I personally think he's a really good safety. Like you mentioned, as far as center field type, he's the best in this class. As far as ball skills go, I think Jamal Adams will end up going ahead of him when it's all said and done, just because he's not allergic to contact. He doesn't have the ball skills that Hooker has, but he doesn't have the weakness in the tackling side of things that Hooker definitely does have. But one thing about Malik Hooker that certainly will catch my attention is, one, he had an interception he returned for a touchdown against Michigan this year, and he played the last 4 or 5 games this year with a sports hernia and had to have surgery on that. He played the playoff game against Clemson as well. Didn't play well in that game because they got blown out of the water, but still played very well down the stretch for Ohio State, which was the best secondary in America, and played injured, which makes me wonder what he could do once he's finally fully healthy. So I really like him. Jabril Peppers, you mentioned, I don't really need to gush over him. I've done it plenty. One thing you mentioned is a lot of people have this idea of he played linebacker because he couldn't play safety, and that's just nonsense. Anybody that paid attention to Michigan football, which I did, Don Brown, the defensive coordinator, Jim Harbaugh, they said it. They moved him to linebacker because of the difficulties they had with the up-tempo offense that Ohio State ran the previous year, and they couldn't get their defense aligned and set up with Ohio State's up-tempo offense. So they put Jabril Peppers there with the hopes of being able to slow down the offense, and really until the fourth quarter of that Ohio State game, they did, and honestly, if they had finished the job, this is something that would have been discussed more and more. And I mean, you can look at it as a negative. A lot of people are looking at it as they put him at linebacker to hide him, and he doesn't have the ball skills. And I know he only had 1 interception, and it was a lucky bounce and all that stuff. He wasn't in position to make a lot of interceptions because of the position they played him in. But I would argue that the strength for Jabril Peppers is he did what exactly was absolutely best for the team and ignored his draft stock. And honestly, you can absolutely argue it's taken a hit because of that, because if Jabril Peppers said, no, forget that, I'm doing what is best for my NFL career, potentially he could have had, I don't know for a fact that this could have happened, he could have had 5 or 6 interceptions this season and been a top 10 pick. Now, we don't know. We'll never know if that would have happened, but he didn't play linebacker because he can't play safety. He's a really good safety, and I think he's right up there. He's the third best safety on my board as far as that goes. Another safety that I really like, Ross, that you didn't mention for namesake is Budda Baker out of Washington. He's a guy you can move him all around. He can play a little slot corner, play a little deep safety. So for one other mention's sake, I don't want to keep going over the names you mentioned because I like all those guys, but Budda Baker is one other guy that I really like as well.
All right, no problem. Let's talk about the more overlooked players at the position. My guy, like I talked about, was Justin Evans. He is a guy that is not incredibly highly thought of, certainly generally actually talked about after Budda Baker. But this is a guy that gave up a QB rating of just 53.1 on throws into his coverage. And I think, a hard hitter, a guy that really, I think, has a chance to be a good NFL safety and an immediate contributor on special teams. I don't think you would really talk about Obi Melifonwu anymore as being an overlooked guy just because he did blow up so much in the Combine and the Senior Bowl. Such an unbelievable athlete, but I went back and watched some of his film at UConn, and it was actually very impressive. I think the tape kind of lays right in there with the numbers, so that's another guy that I really like. And then Tedrick Thompson from Colorado. There are a lot of guys to like out of that Colorado secondary. The Buffs were good again, finally, for the first time in a really, really long time. And 3 or 4 of the defensive backs, I think, are a big, big part of the reason why. Jacob, who are the most overlooked players at the safety position?
Tedrick Thompson's one that you just mentioned. I kind of mentioned him briefly there. One name that I wonder, you guys mentioned him on the cornerback show last week. I don't know if there's been any momentum toward this. One thing that I've thought about briefly, just thinking of switching him from corner to safety, or if he's kind of a Micah Hyde sort of role. Ross, I think you kind of said that last week, but Desmond King out of Iowa, potentially playing him as a safety, strong safety, move him around, kind of that sort of thing. I don't know if that makes him overlooked, underrated kind of thing, but I don't know if Desmond King can necessarily play outside corner, but if you take him in the 3rd or 4th round and have him as that corner safety, Swiss Army knife kind of role, that role I think suits him a little bit better. So for that reason, I guess you could call him overlooked. But yeah, if you want a true safety, Tedrick Thompson's the name that came to mind specifically for me.
Cody, your most overlooked guys.
One guy that really stuck out to me that I think deserves some mention is Monte Nicholson from Michigan State. He's a strong safety, big kid, almost 6'2", well over 210 pounds, and he ran a 4.42 and vertical jump 35 inches and had it over a 10-foot broad. Just, when you watch him on film, there's a lot of inconsistencies, both in the tackling and in the pass game, but I think, there's a lot to work with his size and athletic ability. I think immediately come in and compete for a roster spot on the back end at the spot safety position. But that's a guy you want on your special teams. I mean, that's a big body to run fast and disrupt stuff. So I think he could, be worth a look later on. And he's kind of been an overlooked guy. Thought of more just a big clumbering safety, but turned out he's a pretty damn good athlete at that.
All right, Cody, your favorite safety in this draft?
Man, it's tough. Those top 3 guys are all for me. Baker and Adams, it's tough for me to pinpoint one. It's really kind of they each do their own thing. So, man, I think if you're shooting for the moon, I think you go Hooker and hope he turns into an Ed Reed kind of guy with his ball skills. And his tackling is ferocious. And I think Adams, you can get him more like an Eric Berry, more well-rounded, maybe not going to get you 10 picks a year, or 5 to 10 picks a year, more just a solid all-around player. And I think Baker, he flashes. He's a Bob Sanders impact, Troy Polamalu guy. You wonder how he's going to hold up in the NFL at his size, but he just makes plays. Really pick whatever you want out of those guys. I guess for me, gun to my head right now, I'm going to go Adams. I just love his overall ability. I think his floor is higher than everybody else's. His ceiling may not be quite the Hooker or even Buddha's level, but he's the safest one. So I guess I would lean Adams.
Jacob's favorite safety in this draft is Jabril Peppers.
Cody, let me make something very clear. Jabril Peppers is better than Buddha Baker. I don't see how you can dispute that. But
every turning punts
at playing safety.
Huh.
So I don't. I mean, I'm sorry. That's just how it is. My favorite safety. Yes, it's Jabril Peppers, but if you want me to take off my amazing blue glasses, it's Malik Hooker, which is disgusting for me to say because he wears that scarlet and gray, but the ball skills, the way that we play football in the NFL these days, it's a passing game. Yes, I know Ross, you said it, he's allergic to contact. He doesn't really like to tackle. He's not going to play the run. But at the same time, if that's something that you can find a way to coach into him, his ability to play the ball is special. And I mentioned earlier, we're talking about him playing with a hernia all late in the season and continuing to make big plays against really good teams, save for the Clemson game. I guess they didn't really do anything against Clemson. But continuing to make big plays like that, if I had a board that anybody cared to look at, Malik Hooker would be safety number one on that. I'd rank them Hooker, Adams, Peppers. Those are my top three safeties for right now. So those are my three guys. But Hooker is my favorite player at that position. But my favorite from my heart, yeah, definitely 100% Jabril Peppers.
My favorite safety is Adams. I think, that Eric Berry comparison isn't a bad one. Probably not going to lead the league in picks, but going to be in the top 10 every year and going to provide everything else that an all-pro safety needs to provide. My favorite player, though, I think, is Marcus Williams from Utah. I really like his build. I think I like where you can get him. I believe that you'd be able to get him at the tail end of round 2, potentially even in round 3, and I really just think he's a starting safety from day 1. Here's an interesting statistics. Between 2015 and 2016, he had 10 interceptions in those 2 seasons. And in his primary area, so he's the primary defender on the pass, he gave up 11 catches in 430 snaps. That's the kind of assignment sure and just coverage ability that you see with Marcus Williams out of Utah. Not necessarily a powerhouse college, but definitely, one of those Pac-12 schools that Ted Thompson's paying attention to, and there's really no doubt about that when you look at the last 3-4 years of Packers drafts. So, Jacob, what are the odds that Ted Thompson, with one of those first 6 picks in the first 5 rounds, takes a safety?
I will say, of all the shows we've done, this is the hardest one to hit.
It is. Yep, it is.
And yeah, it is. I'm going to go 40%. And the reason, just because at the end, I could easily see him picking somebody at the end of the first round and saying, this is our Micah Hyde replacement. Jabril Peppers, for example, or Obi Melifanu, or somebody like that. Or I could see him completely ignoring that and saying, we're taking corners and pass rushers and pass catchers, and we're just going to stick with HaHa and Morgan and Kentrell Bryce. For that reason, I think that they're okay with those 3 guys. Kentrell Bryce did some good things at the end of the year. And I could also, Demarius Randall, I mentioned, he played safety in college. I could see them potentially moving him back there if they... Matt Miller, for what this is worth, has said he had a source that said they're highly invested, quote-unquote, in this corner draft class. that could mean they're looking to pick a couple corners and stick Demarius Randall back to safety. I don't know if that's true. It could not be. This is lying season. 40%, and that's as high as I can go because, like I said, this is the most difficult one to handicap. But, yeah, 40%, that's my very uneducated guess and sure to go wrong.
Cody?
My guess would be, 15%. Jacob, you nailed it. Who knows? It could be as late as first. It just depends where value smacks you, But, really low. 15% most, I'd say, that we address in the first 5 rounds.
I'm way higher than that. I'm at 50. I think there's about a half and half shot whether or not they're going to address that position, especially you get into those first 5 rounds. Say he takes a corner in round 1. He's got 5 more picks. I just think he's going to grab another DB, and that DB very well may have that safety designation. So thank you guys once again for listening. Thank you, of course, Cody and Jacob, for being on the show. You guys can check out my work at Cheesehead TV and PackersTalk.com. You can check Jacob out over at FanRag, and you can check out the continuing content that Cody is providing for Cheesehead TV leading up into the draft. Thank you guys one last time, and go Pack Go.